Okay, no. So we restarted. Nice. I guess everything should be good. So, dear attendants, dear participants, if you hear us, if you see everything good, just send us a message plus or some comments. We are waiting. Just know that you are with us, that you are involved. I don't see.
No, me either.
Okay.
Oh no, there is something.
Okay, let's start and hope for the best for the questions and engagement. Okay, I'm leaving. This time is your time. Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm honored to be here and discuss a little bit about what I do, what I did recently. And the discussion is about the future of work and then the impact of automation on the future of work. Recently, we've prepared a report about the possible scenarios for developing countries regarding the future of work and ongoing and expected processes that we can see in the market. Of course, the main theme of this change is automation. The first industrial revolution basically was the automation of the human labor, especially when it came to the very heavy lifting, so to speak. So all of those things that required a lot of manual force were automated, which went for the great benefit of both industry and the workers, of course. However, as we know, this caused a lot of unrest because some people felt that ongoing automation will devoid them of their jobs, and as a result, it will cause the mass unemployment. Those people were called Luddites from the name of Mr. Lud, that was supposedly their leader. That's not confirmed, but that's how this line of thinking goes, that eventually people will be left out of work due to machines taking over. So we are over 200 years in after that happened, and what we can see is that machines didn't take over, at least not yet, for many reasons. One of the reasons is that humans are versatile, meaning they easily adapt to changing environment, and it's pretty easy to make small adjustments to what they do to make it more efficiently, to give better results, to improve the product. Robots and automates are not so good at that. Basically, we have this matrix of what kind of job can or cannot be easily automated. Clearly, the things that are easy to automate are the repetitive things, and we clearly can see how a lot of repetitive jobs are being taken over by the computers and robots. And that it's not surprising because nobody wants to do those jobs, and computers are pretty good at doing them. And this is doesn't only go for manual labor like assembly lines and similar, but also goes for a lot of let's say low-skilled mental labor, like data entry or simple classifications. This sort of engagements are easily replaced by computers. However, as we can see, some of the elements of our economical development pretty much are not that easy to automate. This is mostly for all of the types of creative businesses or those that require human interaction. And how the human interaction is important, we can probably see being at this conference, because going to the conference over the internet is all nice and fun. However, I would rather much more be at the university organizing this event and meet all of you in person and discuss in more detail my presentation and other presentations I attended. And so, of course, we have a Q&A, and I hope for lively discussion later on. But clearly, this is not exactly the same thing as personal interaction. So, so this is clearly one of the limits to the automation. Of course, the recent outbreak changed the way we think and discuss the change in the labor market in the recent months, because a lot of institutions and businesses were basically pushed towards the remote work, also deciding to scrap certain functions and jobs. And this we are observing with very great interest to see how the whole thing will turn out, especially if the outbreak will persist and some sorts of social distancing will be required for the long time period. And as of now, it seems that this is what we can expect, as we don't have a working vaccine, despite of the certain countries claiming to have them. We know they don't really work and are not tested properly, so that's also a problem. And even when we get the vaccine, which we don't know if we will, because let's remember that the vaccine for AIDS is being developed for last couple of decades and we have still nothing. So there's no guarantee that there will be a vaccine against coronavirus. So the adaptation towards less congestion is definitely here to stay. Also in the university, which is, in my opinion, suffering the most, despite of the fact that many students and lecturers find remote teaching fun because it doesn't require commute and well, allows to optimize many things. On the other hand, however, the quality of the process is definitely suffering a lot. And in the long term, such a way of conducting classes and seminars and conferences is definitely not sustainable without the significant loss in quality of both teaching and research. There are also other elements that are important from the point of view of the future of the work and the limits of automation. As we know, developed countries moved a lot of manufacturing to the places where the labor was much cheaper than in their home countries. Mainly Asia, Southeast Asia, also China, of course. Not so much anymore, but initially. And at this point, there is another trend being considered, meaning bringing those factories back home. But of course, without the labor. And this is the dream of fully automated factories with very limited staff that is basically entirely controlled by computers. Well, the problem is that just recently we had 2 factories fully automated that were constructed in Germany by Adidas, of course, to make shoes. And the problem is that it appeared that initially it was a great idea, but even the slightest change in design of those shoes required so much resetting of the robots, so much programming work, adjustments, testing, and so on and so forth, that those 2 factories, brand new factories, were closed altogether, and all of the production went back to Bangladesh. This is because to make a small and changing the design of the shoe is not that difficult for a person that you can explain it to, and is very complicated for the robot. Of course, as soon as it's translated to the robot language, then the robot can make millions of units. But the point is that we don't need those very million units, but we need small variations from time to time, for example, because of fashion trends and so on and so forth. So all in all, it seems that for now, cheap labor has still an edge when we compare it to fully automated factories. On the other hand, however, there is growing incursion of automates into more and more involved elements of higher of the jobs that require a higher level of intellectual input. We've seen very successful implementation of artificial intelligence in diagnostics in medicine, showing that AI is able to classify RTG pictures from the point of view of diagnosing cancer much better than doctors. We see other applications that are upcoming, especially the work concerning the automated cars and, what's even more important, automated lorries. This is a big problem right now with the trucks because, of course, all the regulation and the rest required for the driver, which is, of course, needed. But on the other hand, this keeps the equipment heavily underutilized and therefore more expensive than required. Automated trucks would be definitely much cheaper option in the long run. Of course, the problem is that this problem of driving in a very unstable and unpredictable environment is quite difficult. Let's say that if all of the cars were switched to be autonomous cars, that would be it would be much easier to do, meaning if all cars were robots, that would be much easier to coordinate because robots are less prone to making something stupid and completely irrational or break the rules for whatever reason. They also can communicate with each other pretty easily, which is quite hard with the drivers, human drivers. So this human factor on the road is a big obstacle from introducing robots on the road. We've seen also recently several papers written completely by robots without any human input, and you can read those pieces, and it would be actually pretty hard to tell that those were created by robots. So as you can see, basically we see two things altogether. One thing is replacing the humans with the automats, but that's going slower than expected. But the middle picture is actually the one that is pretty well reflecting what we see right now, which is the human labor with addition of the help of the automation. I already mentioned the ability of the AI to predict the cancer from RTG and how it's better than doctors themselves. But apparently combining AI and the doctor gives even better results. So it's still human-aided work. And this is what we see for the last 200 years. There is very, very few occupations that were actually completely eliminated by automation. The one that I was actually able to find was the elevator operator that is not needed anymore. And actually, it was not replaced by automation per se. It was replaced by the fact that people did the self-service instead of having somebody press the buttons for them, as soon as it became easy enough and safe enough. So far, automation is not that good at eliminations occupation per se, but it is changing the way we work. meaning this eliminating certain aspects of our work, allowing us to utilize our time for something else. Well, for example, in research, in what we do, the element of gathering and processing data in the past was very time consuming for obvious reasons. You had to crunch the numbers. Even if you had the first computers, there was a lot of time of translating the data we had into the punch cards and similar devices. Now we can use this time that was spent for working with data for something else, thanks to this automation. So this is the picture. Still, the most of the consulting agencies are predicting that about 50% of jobs, or actually maybe not entire jobs, but the functions, are at risk of automation. And if you are worrying whether your job will be automated away, there are websites. One of them is, as far as I remember, will I be replaced by robot.com, where you basically include information about your occupation. It gives you the information, what's the probability that your job will be outsourced to the robots. So much about the introduction. I could talk much longer about it. But the point of this exercise is basically discussion of the impact on the developing countries. And of course, developing countries is not one group. And in our analysis, we basically focused on the post-Soviet countries, mostly European ones. Focusing mostly on V4 countries, Visegrad countries, meaning Czechia, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary, but also venturing some other places as well. This is because this group is pretty homogeneous, and it shows how what is the basically most to gain, what was most to gain about after the communists fell, for the countries, and the other part being that we could easily compare certain elements for the countries that are already in EU.
Tomasz,
clearly,
sorry for interruption and bother you. The fact is that participants don't see your presentation, just first page. Or is it okay? Is it okay or not? Because for a long time.
Oh, I wasn't. The presentation, I'll be flipping it whenever it's needed, because I'm not now for the introduction. I'm not flipping the slides yet.
Okay, so
don't worry.
Sorry for interrupting you.
No problem. I can see how that could be this could be an issue, but we'll get there. Don't worry. So as I said, in Visegrad Insight and Respublika Foundation, we've created the Democracy Project, which is basically focusing on Central Europe and presenting the findings of the reports, especially for the post-Soviet countries. Well, I was the leading author of this report, and I was also assisted by Galandal, that was also an editor at large for Visegrad Insight. We were looking at this report, which you can download from the website. The title is "The Future of Work in CE." So if you are interested in what I will be describing, you are welcome to download it for free. And the starting point was basically the discussion of how the change in economics were applied in all those countries, depending what is the approach to the transformation. And the V4 countries are the countries that very quickly integrated into the Western logistic chain. Mostly at the beginning of it, not the very beginning, say, but somewhere in the middle, let's say, or so towards the beginning, meaning providing the, say, cheap qualified labor. And clearly, a lot of what's done in Central Europe is being initial part of the production process for many Western, mostly German companies, and also providing outsourced services for large corporations. And this is pretty interesting because those services are the ones that will be probably outsourced the first to the automation. So a lot of what was done over the last 30 years will probably be wiped out within the next 10 years due to the progress in automation. But clearly this integration into global production chain was very beneficial to CE countries, because as you can see, for the countries that were not so quick to do so, the development over last 30 years is completely different. The chief example being, for example, Ukraine, which started as a country that was wealthier than Poland in 1990, and over the 30 years not being able to basically raise the level of living there. Russia is another one, the country that relied probably too much on its natural resources, and it was a trap for many reasons for the economic development, and also the growth in Russia stagnated for most of the last 30 years, and Russia was twice as wealthy as Poland in 1990, and now it's poorer than that when we are looking at per capita indicators. So those inclusions in global chain was beneficial for the last couple of decades, but it's also a threat for next couple of years. We were therefore looking at the possible scenarios of V4 and other countries under various scenarios of automation in the workforce. Of course, the biggest problem for many countries, especially developed one or developing, but at the higher level of income, is definitely the problem of demographics. So what we can see basically on this picture is old age dependency ratio. What does it mean? It basically means how many people have to work how many old people we have per 100 people in working age. So the solid bar is the current state. The white rhombus is what was there in 1975, and the black rhombus is what we expect in 2050. So clearly, for the most of the countries, we expect this dependency ratio to go up. This is international problem for most of developed countries, as I said, and it will be accelerating very, very quickly. Of course, currently one of the oldest countries in the world is Japan, where they have almost 50 old people per 100 of working age population. But pretty soon they will have about 80 people of old people per 100 working. And soon enough, Spain will be at the same level. So that's pretty frightening. And this is also a very, very visible problem for many post-Soviet countries, Basically all of them. We can see it in Czech Republic, Hungary, especially Poland and Slovakia. So those will be one of the oldest countries in the world soon enough. What is basically the problem here? The problem is that since those countries depend a lot on the young, well-educated workforce, well, this resource is going to be depleted pretty soon. The new generations are much smaller than the older generations, and the generation that actually built the success of like the last 30 years are slowly retiring right now. So if somebody was starting a company in 1990, then this person was probably what, about 30, 25. So now they're what, 55, 60. So close to retirement. And this shortage of the workforce is felt very hard in all of those economies. In all of the region, just 5 years ago, we had significant problems with unemployment, high unemployment, especially among the youth. For last 2 years, basically the unemployment fell almost to zero because, well, we have such shortage of workers. In Poland in particular, we had over 1 million migrants from Ukraine to supplement our workforce, and still having a lot of companies working for workers. So this is already very, very visible and very, very felt by the economy. Of course, the coronavirus crisis kind of solved this problem temporarily because of the freeze in the economy. We have much lower demand for the workforce. But this, of course, will pass, and we will find ourselves in the same problem, not even a worse one, soon enough. This, of course, means a very rapid increase in wages, which is very good for the workers, and they've been very happy in the last couple of years due to the very high growth of wages. However, with the increasing income, we see also the companies struggling to maintain competitiveness, and many companies are losing their competitiveness and are being closed. So basically what we are facing here is the fear that the economies of the aging countries, which are most in Europe, including Eastern Europe, especially including Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, etc., is that there will be not enough workers to fuel the economy, and the companies will basically close. The only solution, there are basically two possible solutions to that problem. One problem is immigration. I told you already about the influx of Ukrainians that were solving this problem temporarily before the COVID crisis. But of course, decreasing the problem in Czechia, Slovakia, and Poland via Ukrainian immigration is making the problem in Ukraine even worse. Yes, so this is just basically a strategy of making your neighbor worse off by basically stripping its resources of young people. And this is a huge problem for the neighboring countries that feel their young people being pulled into European Union, not only the Central Europe, but also Germany, France, Scandinavia, and so on and so forth. And we have a looming threat of countries basically closing the borders and not allowing the young people to leave, which is completely strange, because just 10, 15 years ago, governments were basically suggesting the young people should leave for the West to find a job because there is no jobs locally. So that's how fast the things can change. So this is basically hardly a long-term solution, especially that countries, even reasonably wealthy like Poland or Czechia or Slovakia, cannot compete with Germany that can provide much, much better standards for the migrants, with much more open society that is better prepared to integrate migrants and is not showing certain level of xenophobia that is present in some of those countries. So this solution of migration has several problems. The other problem of replacing the workers is, of course, participating in the automation and embracing it instead of trying to freeze it out or stop it for whatever reason to make sure there is no unemployment. And there are political voices like this saying we should stop technological progress because it is potentially hurtful for the workers. But take into consideration growing amount of pensioners that require a certain level of care, that also takes from the time of the young people, and shrinkage of the workforce, the automation seems to be the only solution. So for the developing countries, automation is a threat from one point of view, but from the other point of view is the only option to maintain economic growth. Otherwise, we face what we called arrested development scenario, which is definitely not a good one. Yeah. The problem with this approach is, however, that developing countries are very slow to adapt to those changes in technology. This is basically going from the point of, for many reasons. First of all, we are based on the cheap labor, and we are the companies in the countries are prepared or expecting cheap labor to flow in forever. The investment into technology-heavy automation and robotic-heavy industries was never very high because there was no point, since you have all of those qualified cheap workers. And this is clearly visible when we look at the statistics of robotization in the industry and how many robots there are per 10,000 employees in the economy. And we have V4 countries as compared to Germany. So even the best of the lot, Czechia and Slovakia, are below the half of what Germany has. And do not forget that Czechia and Slovakia are heavily concentrated on the automotive sector, which is pretty easy to robotize by itself, and all of those robots were brought already in by all of those automotive companies that were investing there in the very beginning, starting with Volkswagen, but not only limited to Volkswagen. So a lot of the economy of Slovakia, but also Czechia, is based on automotive industry, and this industry is already pretty much robotized. So which shows how rest of the industry is poorly robotized and how far there is to go. I'm not even mentioning here the pitiful numbers for Poland and Hungary that show that those countries are not using robots almost at all in their industry, which is a very disturbing thought when we take into consideration all I described before, meaning that the dwindling working age population needs to be replaced by robots. And we do not have investments at par to make sure that this replacements is made, which makes basically the scenario of arrested development or stagnation even so much more probable. The second reason, besides the lack of capital and willingness to invest in such machines and industry, comes from another thing. It's that the weakness of the developing countries' university system. Yeah, when we look at the world rank of the universities, this is Shanghai list. We see that those numbers are really, really low. The best one, Charles University in Prague, is in the third hundreds. Then the Jagiellonian University is in the 400. The University of Warsaw in the 500. The first one in Hungary is in the 600. So we are talking about very, very low quality universities as compared to the best standards. Not to mention Comenius University in Bratislava, that is the basically only one that's on the list, and it's in the 900 of the universities in the world. So clearly, with such standing, it's very hard to build enough of know-how and expertise to include this robotization in the industry, which is another reason why developing countries are not seeing enough investment, because maybe there is enough of a lot of skilled and cheap workforce, but there is not enough very highly skilled specialists that are possibly useful when applying robotic solution. Well, basically, our third scenario says that if we do not look at those problems as obstacles, but instead we look at them as opportunities, we basically can still mitigate those problems. But this requires a lot of thought and effort. Well, first one requires the change in education system. And we can clearly see that this is very hard to do. Universities pretty much look very similarly to the times of communism. I'm not saying here right now exactly about how the buildings look like, because they are new and fancy and there's a lot of things, but the way it's structured, the hierarchy, the way it works, it reminds a lot of what it used to be, because universities, as we know, are very slow to change, which sometimes is a good thing and sometimes it's not. In this particular case, it's not. And with this change would require basically creation of new institutions from scratch, because all attempts of reforms of the existing institutions were basically unsuccessful, as universities were pretty hard to change in any meaningful way. Of course, developing countries cannot create many very high-class universities, but we've seen attempts like this, for example, in Kazakhstan, in Nazarbayev University, when new institution was basically created out of nothing, with the ambition of creating world-class university with completely new structures and new ways of functioning, and leaving the existing universities to be as it is, and making sure the elites, intellectual elites, are basically shaped in these new institutions. Probably such a move would be necessary in many developed countries to make sure that there is sufficient increase in the specialization and expertise to adapt to automation. Second one is reform of migration policy. A lot of developing countries have this xenophobic approach to migrants, arising from various issues, starting with Islamophobia or other xenophobias. And we've seen it really clearly during the migration crisis of 2005, where there was the talk about closing borders, shooting people on the sea, unwillingness to accept any refugees, and so on and so forth. And this is partially from the fear of terrorism, partially from the fear of losing the job by the locals, partially by the fear of unknown, and we don't know who that is and we are afraid. So there's many reasons why many developing countries are really resistant to accepting migrants. And this is very clearly used by some politicians to their advantage, to make sure they stay at power. So this migration reform is very needed, but also at the same time very hard to do. what else? Of course, the embrace of automation in many places. For example, elderly care. This is the segment that is now very highly being looked at in Japan, where they have a lot of elderly people, very old, over 100, that require basically constant care. And this constant care basically means that there is a young person that is unable to work almost at all because needs to care for this elderly person. This is a double hit to the economy. So looking for the robots that are able to do the elderly care in as much as possible, of course, because that's not 100% possible to automate, but this is also very important, taking into consideration all of those things concerning the aging population. If this approach could lead to change pictures, you can see in the previous picture, the last worker was a robot, but this instead of being turned into completely automated, it means utilizing the AI and robotization in order to increase the efficiency and provide the stable growth. We called it the new golden age. We actually should call it the extended golden age, because at least for V4 last 30 years were definitely a golden age of development, and basically a economic miracle that nobody expected to happen. But there is also another way of going about this problem, and this is the approach that is taken by a lot of politicians in many countries, and we can see the main culprits on the picture here, so I don't have to really discuss in much of the detail who's who here and why. But basically, a lot of politicians are now using all of those elements to their advantage to stay at power and playing in people's fear. May it be the question of migration that I already mentioned, and how easy it is to make people afraid of foreigners coming in, and how easy it's make people to resent foreigners, that we've seen in UK, where the main reason why UK decided to do the Brexit was the fact that people resented immigrants from Romania and Poland mostly. We can see problems arising from automation or outsourcing of the jobs. That's the main theme for Donald Trump. That's basically saying that he will bring the jobs back by increasing the tariffs and making a trade war with China, which basically is breaking the globalization and the main reason for the rapid development in the world in last decades, and even more so the rapid development of developing countries, almost all of them, that were able to integrate in the global supply chain. So that's another way, and politically we seem to be going this way in many places, where politicians that are raising those issues are gaining support. And maintaining this support, Orban is governing the third, in Hungary is governing here's third term, Kaczynski in Poland second term. We can see certain breaks in Slovakia to a degree. We'll see what will happen in the United States in a little bit over a month. That will also show us whether this trend of populism that is basically trying to reverse certain changes that were beneficial, playing on the fears of people, will persist or not. If it will, of course, we can probably be in a much bigger economic problem than expected, for all of the reasons I explained before, especially due to the demographic issues. So what were the policy recommendations from this report? First of all, that's the large scene for the state that has a, let's say, opportunity, but also obligation to help certain sectors to change, or people working in those sectors to change their occupation. With the green revolution going in United Europe, we have, of course, a huge problem with miners, especially in Poland, but not only. We have problems with coal power generation and many others. And those people need to be, to a large degree, reskilled. And it cannot be put to waste as it was in the past, when the closing of the mines basically meant sending all of those miners to the retirement, because we need people to work, not to be in the retirement. So here we need the reskilling towards working with AI, working with automation, working with computers as much as possible, of course, because we know that's not always possible. If somebody was working 1 kilometer under the earth for last 20 years, it's unlikely he will become a programmer. But still, there is a lot of things this such person could do with success and using automation. Second part is the question of what to do if we have a problem of a lot of people out of work due to the lack of competences and possibly being a pensioners. And this is, of course, a part of the broader discussion of universal basic income, which I'm not personally a big fan of, but that's definitely a theme that's going around. And if those scenarios of high-paced automation will be realized, meaning that 70% of people will be out of work, the discussion of universal basic income will basically go back to being meritful, because, well, those people cannot die of starvation. Of course, we have the question of the service industry, especially in the face of COVID crisis. So this is the question of how to utilize the excess time that will be freed by the automation, and the service sector is definitely a provider of a lot of jobs. Let's not forget the automation that goes on for the last 200 years is mostly reducing the amount of jobs in manufacturing and agriculture, and those people mostly find a new employment in the services. So this is something we can expect and try to foster. But on the other hand, we have to look at what's the impact of the current crisis on this sector, because that's the sector that's hit the most by the pandemics. And if it's some of these parts of it are eliminated, we'll be facing a tough spot here. And of course, there is a lot of room for international cooperation, for spreading the information and excellence and competences with automation and AI, because certain countries, if they are left out of this transformation, they will be probably almost permanently excluded from the developed countries and developed logistics system, which will be very hard to break out of, and this will be to nobody's advantage. So this is basically the contents of the report and the most of the recommendation we've had. If you have any questions right now, I'm open to discussing them, so I hope they will show up if they did, because I don't see them right now, not yet.
So we have two questions, and first question from me. What is the role of universities in higher education in such a future? I guess so. Labor market is great, but you talk about reform of higher education. I guess when we talk about labor market, much more important skills, not diploma or fundamental education. And if we talk about contemporary online higher education market and some retraining courses, online courses, and so on, we can see a real competition on this market. And when we talk about labor, employer, and human resource manager, they're interested in our skills but not diploma. Probably we don't need to reform our classical higher education system, but we should not prohibit or restrict this quite new environment of online education and different platforms and facilities. What do you think about this?
Well, with the online courses and online university, this is a very interesting topic, by the way. Basically, development of online universities is basically the death of a lot of local universities. Because when you're talking about online courses, you can basically, as long as you know English, of course, easily enroll in the programs in the best universities in the world immediately. Yes, at the small fee usually, or no fee at all. So basically, online courses will eventually be dominated by the biggest players with the best content. And the local players will only be able to compete when we are talking about local languages. So that's basically the niche for them. Yes, because you cannot teach I don't know, physics better than MIT usually, and so on and so forth. But what I'm saying here is the higher education is a lot about the human interaction, discussion, pupil-teacher interaction, and so on and so forth. And this you cannot provide via online courses. This is impossible, basically. And because of that, I've took part in many courses, which I enjoyed a lot, from many things that interest me. I'm not saying about conducting the courses, but that of course as well. But it's missing this very serious component. So the local universities are still very, very needed, but mostly for on-site kind of teaching. So that is my opinion on that. Going to the second question. Automation is, for elderly countries, the automation is basically the only solution there is. And well, the second part to this question is, what about the countries as China or India? China is also a country that's getting old very quickly, very quickly. And it will be one of the oldest countries in the world very soon. In economics, we basically say that the China will probably get old before it gets rich. So that's a huge problem for the China and direct effect of one-child policy, basically. And now they are starting to even encourage people to have more children. Of course, not many, but let's say 2. But people don't want to have more children anymore, which is the natural course of action, basically, because we can see that almost anywhere. Like, whichever country gets out of poverty, the number of children per woman is decreasing, even more so if there is an increase in education among females. Yeah, if you want to stop the population growing, let the girls go to universities, and you have immediate drop in number of children per woman, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I'm just saying it is what it is. So China is also definitely one of the countries, elderly countries, and we can clearly see how China is investing a lot into automation because they know the which way they're going. So here it's, as usually with China, it's not very loud. They are doing it quietly, step by step. But those factors in China are no longer what we remember from 90s even, where you had a lot of people doing some simple things basically with very basic tools. That's not the case anymore. India is slightly different case because, yes, India is one of the few countries that actually don't have the demographic problems as of yet. India is at the same time very underdeveloped. I've been visiting India last year, was it? Yes, last year. And the problem of automation does not apply there yet because they are a few steps before that, even in the major cities. So what's about India? That's a very good question, and I don't really have an answer to that. But it's definitely something that we need to take a look. One part of the answer is, however, and what we see, at least in our part of the Europe, is the increasing migration from India to the countries that need the workforce. So basically, they are kind of exporting what they have in excess, meaning people. and those people show up in very different places we couldn't expect them, and they're still here. But how the automation will impact the India market is a very good question.
Okay,
I don't
Tomasz,
have an answer.
I'm not sure that we have any more time for discussion, because in 2 minutes we'll start next session. Let me thank you so much for so interesting description, explanation of labor situation in Eastern Europe and all over the world. It was useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye.
Let's end in.